Mhm. Oh yeah, we're gonna record this. I was supposed to say that. Wow, we're gonna record this, and you guys all got that just now. So, yeah. With that, I think we can get started with Shannon. Appreciate
Okay, great. Yeah, thanks, Brandon. Great to see everyone. Welcome. So as Brandon mentioned, I'm Shannon Anderson with the Powder River Basin Resource Council. I'm about to start my 16th legislative session. Like Janet Ivanovich books, I labeled them. So it's my Sweet 16 legislative session. Looking for it to be very sweet. We'll see if the legislators cooperate. And I'm really just going to take you through the legislative website. So for those that haven't really been on it very much, and even for those that have, there's a few tricks in here that I think will be helpful as you sit at home and try and follow the legislative session, try to figure out what bills are being filed and talked about, what committee meetings are happening, all of that. So this is the main page here for the legislature's website, wyoleg.gov. You can bookmark it, pretty easy, but it's also, if you Google it, it comes right up too. And they have already updated everything for the new session. So I'll start you down here. There's some good things you can kind of click on in the sliders, but I always start actually here with session information. And session information is kind of the catch-all tab. It gives you both the legislation that's been filed, it gives you the calendar, and it gets you audio and video all in like one place with multiple tabs. So there's ways you can get there separately to the legislation, to the calendar, and to audio and video links, but session information actually gets you there all together in one spot. And so here's the bill list that's been filed so far. I mean, we've heard rumors of up to 700 bills. A typical general session, which is what we're about to face, can have 600 to 700 bills. So what I would say is pace yourself and kind of keep looking. Bills can get filed on the House side through January 31st. So it's the whole month of January. You'll keep seeing bills show up. The list is really helpful. You can search by number of bill, you can search by title, you can search by sponsor. If you see kind of the name of a committee, that means it's been vetted through the interim process, the time between legislative sessions where committees are actually sponsoring the bill. And then you'll also see on here the last action, whatever happened with the bill. So whether it was passed by committee, reported back to the floor, whether it's had any floor action, that kind of thing. And then as it gets through the process and enrolled is when it actually has been signed by both the Speaker of the House and the President of the Senate as a bill that then goes to the governor. And then chaptered is when it's actually been signed by the governor and becomes new law in Wyoming. So I'll kind of pull up a bill to just show you this too. So this is a bill that the conservation community has been paying attention to. It would enable the Department of Environmental Quality to basically regulate a new kind of radioactive material associated with rare earth mining under our state regulations, as opposed to currently the Nuclear Regulatory Commission has to give a license to these kind of facilities. It's similar to what we did with uranium mining a few years ago. And this is an interesting bill because it'll show you a few things on here. So this is the number and the title kind of at the beginning. The text as it's pulled up on the website will always be the current version. And there's multiple versions you'll see here kind of on the tab on the right sidebar. The introduced version is the version that is basically filed at the beginning of the session. There will be a version after the first House of either the House of Origin, the first chamber. This is a House bill, so after it gets through the House, if there's any amendments, that's what's called an engrossed bill because it's a bill engrossed with the amendments from that initial House. And then as we talked about the enrolled version of the bill, is the version of the bill that then goes to the governor. And then you have, of course, the final version that's chaptered and becomes law. So here we just have the introduced version of the bill. That's the only one we have so far. And then you kind of go through, you'll say who it's sponsored by. This is what's called the enactment clause of the bill. And it tells you basically what the bill does. Sometimes this is a very helpful description. Sometimes it's not very helpful at all. But it's a good place to start if you're just looking for a quick summary of, is this a bill that I should pay attention to? Because sometimes the bill title just doesn't really tell you anything at all. The next part is that, so it, under the enactment clause, it kind of says being enacted, and it tells you what the bill does. And this one's interesting because it's both creating a new subsection of existing law and then amending some subsections. It's important to read this because sometimes you'll see, creating new law or amending current law. And that'll give you an idea of what's actually going on with the bill. And here we have the Wyoming Environmental Quality Act, Section 2001, and it's amending that by adding in some additional pieces to the state regulatory authority. And then that's basically what it's doing. You'll see the new text and underlined, what is removing in the strikeout portion. And then you'll kind of scroll down. So that's what the bill does and what would actually become law if it's passed. The rest of it, the other sections, this is what's called session law. It doesn't actually end up in the statutes, but it is kind of the record of the legislative process and what's going on. And so here's some things about a fee structure. So this is kind of a rulemaking instruction to the Department of Environmental Quality that's going to have to happen. Here's a section about adding staff. And then this section 4 is an appropriation, which I'll get to in a minute. And then section 5 is, and sometimes it's section 2, sometimes it's section 3, whatever the last section of the bill is, it will always tell you when the bill becomes effective. The default under Wyoming law is July 1st, which is the start of the state fiscal year. But sometimes you'll see language like this, which is this act is effective immediately upon completion of all acts necessary for a bill to become law. So basically, as soon as the governor signs the bill, it becomes law. And often that happens, particularly as it is in this bill, when there's like a rulemaking requirement or, something that needs to happen faster than July 1st to get going. So you'll often see that. It's normally for exceptions, but honestly, over the last few years, I've seen this being used more and more. So you'll see a lot of bills that actually do become effective in March when the governor signs it versus say July. So scrolling back up, the other things on here in the sidebar, you'll see again, the last action for the bill. This is a bill number signed, that date that it happened. You'll see if there's any meetings scheduled to discuss the bill from committee and whether it's going to be up for floor debate or not. So the bill webpage kind of shows all of that about the bill. So if you're tracking a bill, it's good to just kind of pull this up. Similar to the tabs at the top, status will show you that same thing. The amendments are helpful, and I'll show you both committee amendments and floor amendments. Committee amendments also have to be adopted on the floor. Generally, it's, if the committee does it, the floor just kind of rubber stamps it, but sometimes there is a debate about a committee amendment. And then it goes through all the different readings of the bill. So you'll have committee of the whole amendments, which are first reading of the bill, also called general file. And then you have second reading amendments and third reading amendments. And then the sponsor of the amendments, and then if there are amendments, it'll show whether they passed or failed on the website, so you can kind of track that through too. The fiscal note tab is really helpful to look at, particularly for those of you concerned about state spending and what that means. So this bill does have a pretty hefty fiscal note associated with it. which was a concern when uranium went through the agreement state status, which is what's going on here. And you'll see that, the different fiscal years of the state, what is being appropriated to the Department of Environmental Quality to get this done. And then there's kind of the summary at the beginning. So it's, $1.8 million that this bill is going to cost the state of Wyoming to do. And, I can go into a lot on this, but, I think there's a big question on whether we're going to get a return on investment with this bill. So that's a fiscal note. It's, again, important to kind of look at. Sometimes, unfortunately, you'll see towards those, 600 bills, once you get down to like 500 or so, that you'll get to this little description that says there wasn't enough time to prepare a fiscal note. And so that often happens, unfortunately, with bills filed later towards that end of January timeframe. But if there's an appropriation, the bill does have to go through the Joint Appropriation Committee directly. Sometimes the fiscal note will also say if there's like an administrative impact without an appropriation, which are important to pay attention to. So if you care about agencies like the DEQ or Game and Fish, and whether they have enough resources to do their job, if you see a fiscal note that basically says this is going to impact the agency and there's no money appropriated to do that, that will impact them and their ability to kind of cover their existing workload. The votes tab will show you the votes. Digest is really helpful. And if you go back to the bill text, it's also a PDF option. And the digest will show you all of the amendments, all of the votes, who votes for them. It basically is a summary of all of these tabs together. And again, you can PDF it. And sometimes if you have a bill, say, there is like crimes against critical infrastructure, which we're expecting to see again this legislative session, we beat it back 3 years in a row. We can pull the digest version from those previous versions of the bill, see what amendments passed, what didn't pass, what the debate looked like, what the votes were. Some bills, there was one that I worked on that was very controversial. It had a 13-page digest. And I gave it to the new legislators and said, hey, like, look at this bill, like it's been worked and it was controversial. And it really was helpful for them to have that kind of history of the legislative process from previous times that was discussed. So the digest is a really helpful kind of thing. And again, it's a good summary. If you ever want to know where a bill is or what's been going on or how controversial it is, to just click on that digest tab. The comment tab, this is enabled during the legislative session. And every bill has one of these. It is what's called the online hotline. And you can contact your legislators this way about the bill directly. So there is always that comment tab as well. And I encourage you to use that as one of the most effective ways to let folks know about a bill and what you think about it. So that's kind of the bill list. And then again, the calendar will get you whether there's committee meetings, that kind of thing. The rules are that committee meetings have to be posted by no later than 4 p.m. the day previously, which is not a lot of notice, to be honest, especially if you're looking at an 8 a.m. committee meeting the next day. So sometimes it's really hard to be able to track the process, but if you have a good relationship with the committee chair, it's often important to kind of ask them, like, is this going to be on Wednesday or Friday, or do you know when you're going to schedule a bill if it's one that you really care about? Try and get that information in advance of it being publicly posted. Similarly, sometimes on that scheduled committee meetings, you'll see it before it actually shows up on the calendar, if it's already been scheduled in by the committee chair and announced publicly. The audio and video link is also helpful. There's both audio and video coverage of the floors of both the House and the Senate. And then there's also audio and video archive. Well, there's video archive of committees as well. On the top of the legislature website, I'll just go through a few of this stuff briefly. I would encourage you to use these tabs. They're less used, but they're also very helpful. So if you ever need to get the current state statutes, state statutes and constitution. It's right there, and it pulls up an annotated version of the current state statutes. So particularly if you're looking at a bill that's amending current law, often not the full statutory text is going to be in the bill. And so you have to kind of read it back through the existing law and to really see what the bill does. So that's a helpful thing to keep in mind. State finances, this is the whole budget process. And it's, if you want to dive into the budget, that's the tab to look at. Publications and research is kind of misleading because it also has this thing called handbooks and policies, which is actually the rules of the legislature. So it's not really research, it's actually the rules. So if you want to find the rules, that's where you find them. They haven't yet adopted the rules yet for this legislative session, but there will be House rules, Senate rules, and joint rules, which are rules adopted jointly by both the House and the Senate. But back to that session information thing, there will eventually be a rules tab as well up here that will actually have the rules kind of in that handy spot. But if you want to find them before that, the publications and research tab, handbooks and policies is where to go there. And there's also, if you're ever kind of wondering about, okay, well, did they violate a posting requirement or what's going on? This is where you would look for some of that going on. So policies and procedures and then the rules. There's also, reports to the legislature and all kinds of actual publications and research, but the rules and policies are in that tab as well. Citizen engagement, there's all kinds of handbooks and information, maps of the Capitol and the committee rooms, all of that stuff. And then any of their news releases and other things as well. So there's lots of good info on here. And I would just say, like, if you ever want to dive a little deeper, or if you have questions about where to find something, feel free to reach out to me. But yeah, the main thing is just you want to kind of follow the bills and the meetings and kind of track the process a little bit. So I will pass it on to whoever's next.
Okay, thanks, Shannon. And yeah, just to reiterate what Shannon was saying, there's a lot of information coming today in a pretty short time. So feel free to reach out to myself, Era, and John. I'll dump all 4 of our email addresses in the chat here in a minute. But yeah, just a lot of information right now. So reach out if you do have questions. We're happy to chat with you. Next up, we have John on how to contact your legislator a couple different ways, and what effective contact with a legislator looks like. So with that, take it away, John.
Great. Thank you so much, Brandon, and Shannon. Thank you so much too for the overview of the website, how to track legislation. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen here. Let's go share. And it's a similar screen. What do you know? And real quick, just by intro, I know Brandon provided intros earlier, but my name is John Burrows. This will be my 4th session headed down to Cheyenne. And I work right now as the Energy and Climate Director for the Wyoming Outdoor Council. So headed down to Cheyenne actually this Sunday to get started here. Real quick, wanted to just show a really important part of this website. And I would say this website is absolutely the biggest resource I think that we can share with you all on the call. This section over here, which is going to help you identify who your legislator is, if you don't know that already, and maybe even more relevant in some cases, where different legislative districts are and who the legislators are in those districts. And then also a little bit about how to get their contact information, and then we'll run through some tips on what effective communication looks like, just given how busy busy schedules are, and other contexts like that. So let's look at the senators here, and we're going to pick Fremont County because that's where we are right now in Lander, at least where I am at right now in Lander. And here's the list of all the senators currently that have just been sworn in. And you can see some information, their party, their district, county, their phone number, and the total number that we have here, which I believe now is 31. Let's take a look at, we're going to look at Cale Case, Senator Cale Case. And if you go to this legislator profile, you can see Senator Case's district. You can see his occupation in this case, which can be helpful, understanding the prior history and work experience of different legislators. You can see the committees that Senator Case has served on, in this case for many, many years. And you can see a current member of the Judiciary Committee and the chairman right now of the Senate Corporations Committee. Importantly, you can look at different sponsored bills that legislators have proposed and sponsored over their time. And then you also have a contact information, both the email, which is usually it's always at this wyoleg.gov, and then home email, home address. It's actually pretty amazing that we have all this information right at our fingertips. This is an easy way to go if you know your senator, you're just looking, senator or representative, and you're just looking to try to get their contact information. There is also, in this case, a Find My Legislator tool, which is a mapping function that's on this website. That is actually really, it's a little bit clunky. It's loading right now, for example. But it's really neat to see the actual district boundaries for the Senate and the House. And that can really help you understand just the lay of the state, who is representing who where. So in this case, we'll stick with Lander as well. And we'll look at current House districts. You could switch over to current Senate districts. And we'll take a look at, so House District 33, this would be Sarah Penn. You could find her under the list of representatives, and then phone number, email, and then also an address. And you could do that for all over the state. This is a very just useful tool to see the entire representation across Wyoming and the different House and Senate districts. So fairly straightforward on showing this here. Let's see if I can real quick. Going to move to what, and probably in some ways, what is more significant here. Good tips for contacting your legislators. And I think the first thing to really think about is just keeping in mind the context of a legislative session in Wyoming. Like we're pretty unique and actually in many ways fortunate that we have a citizen legislature here in Wyoming. But that has some drawbacks as well. It means that our different representatives and senators, they don't have staff necessarily. They have the Legislative Service Office to help, but they don't necessarily have staff to help with contacting. So you have to imagine in a busy session like the one we're about to go into, where we could see 700 plus bills, there is a ton of email correspondences going back and forth. There's a ton of communication, things move very quickly. So you have to really keep that in mind when you think about writing and contacting your legislator on a specific issue. Another important thing I think that we often forget is that because we have a citizen legislature, a lot of our representatives and senators, they're not subject matter expertise in certain issues. And that's a really important thing. And it's another reason why different writing in and commenting and getting the voices of people is so important. And especially when you might be a subject matter expert in a field and you're providing that information. So making sure that it's effective is really key. And so some general tips that we like to keep in mind when we encourage folks to take action on a bill or write a committee or write a senator or representative are here on the screen. And a few of them that I'll share here, and there are more, and there might be some more questions that folks have at the end of this that we can talk about. I think one thing to keep in mind really up front is trying to time your letter or your engagement so when it's going to be most impactful. There's so many decisions that are being made over the course of the next 2 months. So timing, when is an issue on the table and when is my letter or my action actually going to have impact? That's one reason why you have groups like Powder River Basin Resource Council and the Wyoming Outdoor Council providing action alerts, because we try to help, we're following this process and are trying to set up comments to be most impactful at certain times when that decision is on the table and can really make a difference. Trying to understand, when a letter or contact is going to be most impactful. Another very obvious thing, but sometimes people forget, because it gets heated. The session is full of a lot of different controversial bills in many cases, but is really try to be polite. Try to be kind and polite, be yourself and be authentic. We hear a lot of times from different legislators that form letters often just get overlooked. If you're just, putting your name into a big letter that's already written, that's being received 100 times by a certain legislator, chances are that's not going to have a huge impact on them. But a personalized letter that's polite, that's authentic, that clearly comes from someone who cares, like that will typically matter a lot more. Another really important tip, because there's simply just so much email traffic and there's so many decisions on the table, include a bill number and your request in the subject line if you're emailing. So this would look like vote no or vote yes on bill XYZ, right? I'll show an example of this later, but it's really important because sometimes maybe that email doesn't even get opened, but as long as the subject line is there, that at least is a data point for your legislator, whoever you're contacting, that you're someone who cares and you're asking them to vote no. Yep, that's that point 6 here. So include that bill number and request in the subject line. It's also nice after you write your message to write the same thing there at the end. Conclude, you really can't say it enough. Vote no, vote yes, right? That's really important because that might be the only takeaway that they get from reading 100 different or 500 different emails on the same thing. Another important thing is, particularly if you're Wyoming based, if you're a constituent, let them know. Let them know up front. That is street cred right there. They want to listen to constituents. They want to represent the people who they're charged with representing. So let them know if you are. This is another good tip here, just for good writing in general, but try to be brief and get to the point. You don't have to explain everything, and you can always add additional resources, and you can always offer to follow up. It's a real wonderful benefit of being here in Wyoming, population of 580,000, right? But we can actually get to know and meet our legislative representatives. So take them up on that if you get the opportunity. Another really important thing, I don't think, for those who haven't been down to the session, it is so much work. Folks are putting in 16-hour days in many cases. Be thoughtful around that and really appreciate the work that's happening. You might not always agree with it, but a lot of hard work is happening. And I think it really goes a long way when we can appreciate and thank people, thank our legislators for what they're doing. So try to incorporate that in your comments. Another thing that we look at it pretty favorably, I believe, is leave your hometown and your name in the signature. If you're Wyoming based, if you're not, it's not so important. In fact, maybe even don't. But if you're Wyoming based, it's great to know, hey, this person from Lander, and John Burroughs from Lander. It's just a nice formality there at the end of a message. I'll also say that calling and leaving a message can be great and super efficient as well. Particularly if you're a constituent of a certain legislator or have a personal connection. And many of these same tips apply about being polite, making sure that you're very clear, support or oppose, in a voicemail as well. You probably won't pick them up. You probably won't get them on the call, just knowing how busy it is, but it can be an effective and quick way to communicate too. And then finally here, don't be offended if they don't get back to you at all, or it's just total radio silence. Again, think hundreds of emails a day. You just simply can't respond to everybody. Sometimes I'll note, and in fact, we actually ask a lot of this in our action alerts and our work, both with Powder River Basin Resource Council and WAC. Sometimes it's really important to write a full committee, a House or Senate committee on a bill that's up for discussion, and we flag that in an action alert. That's a very similar kind of message. It's just that you're going to have multiple people in the to column there of an email. If you have time, you can write into everyone individually. That's a lot of time. Sometimes, and what we see often is folks just put in the different legislators in that committee and send the email like that. And actually, so an example I have of a really good letter It's a little bit on the long side. Like most people aren't going to be sending letters this long, but that's because the person writing was actually very, very knowledgeable and had a lot to offer. This is an example that kind of incorporates some of those tips from back in 2021 on a bill and an issue that we were really engaged, both Powder River Basin Resource Council and WAC very engaged on, which was Senate File 16. It related to net metering and rooftop solar. We were opposed to this bill. And you can see this is a letter that went to the House Corporations Committee. And it was a really effective letter. You can see here some of those same things in play, right? Like the subject line, please vote no on the bill number, very clear. Here's the entire committee on the House side. Very respectful in how it was presented. Dear Chairman Zwanitzer, Representative Blackburn, right off the bat, hey, I'm a Lander resident. You may not know this, but Lander, Wyoming is a hotbed for solar. Again, reiterating the position that you want them to take, please. We hope that you do not support this bill, or SF-16. Really nice paragraphs with good information that are not too long, that also bold the important pieces up front. You know, Lander is home to Wyoming's largest rooftop solar business. Just a really solid point that can stick in somebody's head. And you can basically skim the rest because that's pretty much what's going to happen, you can guarantee. And then at the end of the message, you know, repeating again, please vote no, and being thankful here. You know, really appreciate your willingness to serve in this great state and appreciate your efforts. And then even, you know, the kind of cherry on top here from Lander, Wyoming again. So this is a local person who really cares about this issue. So that is what I have in terms of just good tips for writing and contacting your legislators, and then the functionality on the website to help you do that. And then the last thing I would just say is we know it's a lot to track. That's why we're in business. We're down there doing this work, and we'll try to alert you all, at least on issues of conservation importance, when the best time to write and take action is. And so with that, unless there are any additions from Shannon or Era, I'll pass it right back to you, Brandon. We can get to the questions after Era.
Great. Thanks, John. Again, drinking out of a fire hose, a lot to take in there. So feel free to reach out to us. There's a couple questions about, can we share the letter and an email? We'll have some follow-up at the end. So I see those questions, and we'll get to Era and what effective testimony looks like. And then we can jump into the Q&A and discuss how to follow up on some of these links, a draft of that letter, and then the tips that John just shared. So with that, I'm excited to hear from Era on what makes effective testimony. Thanks, Era.
Thanks for being here. I think the only other thing, John, that I would add about the emails is one of the ways that we can activate a lot of folks is sending out templates for folks to write form emails. And if you have the opportunity to take a little bit more time and tailor that, especially the title and the opening sentences, if they've read one form email, they tend to disregard the others. And so that can go a long way to customize that. So I want to talk about testimony, and giving testimony is more impactful than writing an email. Both are great. The more the merrier in terms of what you do. And in-person testimony can be even more impactful than remote when that's possible. One of the challenges with remote testimony is that we're not going to know until session starts which committees will allow remote testimony. And some committees may allow remote testimony, but then either on certain issues or on certain days choose not to. And so if it's super important for you to testify on something, being there in person, if at all possible, is the sure way to be heard. So first, I'll talk a little bit about what makes good testimony, regardless of whether you're remote or in person, and then we'll look at some of the logistics of testifying first remotely and then in person. And I'll go ahead and share just some tips for good testimony. And so when I think about good testimony is brief. Sometimes legislators will, or the chair folks will actually limit the amount of time that someone can speak, particularly on contentious issues. So shorter is better. Practice ahead of time and aim for your testimony to be in that 1 to 2 minute range. No more than 3. They're going to hear from a lot of folks, and it's a super busy time. Good testimony is also really simple. It avoids jargon, it avoids acronyms. Many of these folks are new, they may not know any of that. So use plain language and limit yourself. Focus on 1 to 3 points. And if you just can't limit yourself to those 3 points, find a partner to testify and take on those other points, because they will lose you if you're covering too many distinct things. As much as we may value numbers and facts and things like that, the best testimony takes those and combines that with emotion. We really connect with each other as humans through stories, through emotion, and ask yourself, like, how are you or people you're connected with directly impacted by the issue? What story can you give in 30 seconds to really bring it home for these legislators? And as you tell that story and give your testimony, think about the important values that are there. Can you touch on common values, universal values, or even better, can you do a little bit of homework on your legislators and figure out, like, what are their specific values? And the more we can create things that connect with emotions and connect with the values of the folks we're trying to persuade, the more effective we're going to be. As Joseph Campbell said, like, people forget facts, but they remember stories. And I really think that that's true. The other piece to think about through that is that testimony is your opportunity to connect and to persuade. It's really important that the focus is on what they need to hear versus what you need to say to sort of get off your chest for something. And so it can be helpful for that connection piece to open with agreement on something that's super simple. You know, we value this or certain pieces that you can be confident in. And once you've given your agreement, your opening piece, and those 3 points, really wrap up with a summary, 3 takeaway sentences. So your key points, they're sure not to miss, and it's the last thing that they hear. And then finally, just like John said with emails, end with a thank you for their time or for any other aspects of their service. So that's the bulk of like what is actually in the testimony. Some other thoughts to make really good testimony is listening to what others are saying before you. It's important not, and a way of respecting our legislators is not to repeat what other folks have said. They get really, really impatient if you just start saying something that someone before you said. And so I often find myself coming with testimony already written out, and then I'm constantly crossing things out or adding little notes as I'm listening to other folks. So I'm respectful and efficient with time and not repeating things. It can be useful to, if you have some more complex points, to have a handout or summary of your points that you email to each committee member ahead of time. If there's really in-depth information that you think is important but isn't going to fit in those 1 to 3 minutes, put that as an attachment. Know that very few folks are going to read anything that's nitty-gritty, but if that's what it takes for you to like stick to that short time and those focused points, attachments are great, and let folks know that you'll be testifying. And then practice. It can be intimidating, whether it's on Zoom or in person, to speak in front of a bunch of folks in suits kind of staring at you. And practice can really help with that. It can help you refine your language, and it can help you keep to that really brief time frame. And then finally, thank yous, they go a long way, whether it's for this particular bill that you're testifying on or for building future relationships. For those who voted the way that you hoped that they would, it goes a long way just to follow up with an email. And as John said, they get lots of emails, so just make that subject line really clear. Thank you for your vote on, and whatever the phone number is. So that's sort of the what of testifying. And now let's get a little bit more into the logistics, or the how. For both remote testimony and in-person testimony, some tips. Dress appropriately. For many of us, myself included, that's a little bit nicer than what I wear every day. And I'm just thinking about how I present myself, at least from the waist up in Zoom. And then when you start your testimony, you're going to address the chairperson after they recognize you, and it's usually Mr. or Madam Chairman. And you'll open by clearly stating your name. So, Madam Chairman, my name is Era Arano. I'm representing Wyoming Outdoor Council. And right there, they have my name and some context. Many of you will be speaking on behalf of yourself as a citizen. So introduce yourself as a citizen and maybe give them a sentence or two of context, where you live in the state or things that you're really passionate about, so they know who's talking to them and can work with it. At the end, once you've completed your testimony, the chairperson will ask other committee members if they have any questions. And all communications go through the chair. So if someone has a question, they won't ask you directly, they'll ask the chair to ask you. And then the reverse goes, you will answer to the chair rather than to a specific legislator. And if you ask a question, if they ask a question, you don't know the answer, it is totally fine to say, I don't know. If you say, I don't know, and then let me find out, it's important that you do follow up with that. And if you do know, go ahead and share that. And it's easy to watch past committee meetings, as Shannon mentioned, if you want to just get a feel for what that flow looks like in terms of addressing the chairperson or answering questions. From there, I want to talk a little bit about the technical logistics of remote testimony, and I'm going to switch over to this page that we know and love so well. So from this home page, you can go to the session information that Shannon showed you, or you can go to this legislative meetings tab, and you'll find the calendar. Right now, they're all home resting and packing, so there's nothing happening. So I'm going to go to a previous week to show you what that looks like. So here we see there is a committee meeting. You have the committee, the time. If you're testifying in person, here's the location in the Capitol for where that will be. And then you can watch. That will take you to the YouTube channel where you're just a listener. But if you would like to participate, there'll either right here be another button that says testify, or click on this details tab, and when it's possible to testify, there'll be a button up here that says testify. And you'll click on that and it'll give you the ability to register, and then it'll give you a Zoom link. Couple of things it's really important to remember: just because you're watching on YouTube doesn't mean you're signed up to testify. YouTube is passive, you just watch, they have no idea you're there. Testifying means you need the Zoom link to be able to interact when the chairman calls on you. When the chairman asks for public comment for the particular bill you're interested in, you'll use the Zoom button to raise hand, and then you can unmute yourself once you're called on, or they'll unmute you, depending on the tech savvy of that particular meeting. If you happen to be watching the YouTube and in the Zoom, it's really important that you silence the YouTube before you start your testimony, or all anyone is going to hear is a lot of echoes, and that's challenging. So just make sure you're on one or the other. For in-person testimony, let us know you're coming. If we have the ability to, we'd love to meet you, help you find that room, go answer any questions that you have. But you already saw where to look up what room that legislative committee is meeting in. Outside the room, you'll go ahead, there'll be a sign-in sheet, go ahead and sign in, and then just find any seat that feels comfortable to you and wait until public testimony is called by the chairperson for that bill. And you'll raise your hand and be acknowledged. And then you just walk up to the front. Usually there's a desk and you'll need to turn on the microphone, which they'll coach you on. And go ahead and give that powerful story of testimony to really connect with folks. A bonus for testifying in person is that you can meet with your legislators in person before or after, and that can be really powerful. And if you connect with us, we can talk to you about how to call folks out from the floor to meet with you in the lobby, or give that elevator pitch for things that you're passionate about for those you run into in the home. So remember, good testimony, be brief, connect with emotions and tell a story, and reach out to us if you have any questions.
All right, thanks, Era. Thanks, John, and thanks, Shannon. We've got some time for some questions. Going through the chat, Kathleen Peterson asked early on a location for the vocabulary for specific areas of bill and actions. When Shannon was going through, I dropped in there the glossary from the Citizens Guide. Again, feel free to reach out if you do have more detailed questions that you can't find in the Citizens Guide. Shannon, I don't know if there's a better location or different information than that glossary, but that link is there. And then Megan asked, can John share this letter? We've been trying to figure out how to share some links coming out of this webinar. WALK will be sending a follow-up thank you email to all the participants that signed up. We might have some links in there, or we're also going to do a legislative preview early next week email that might have some links in there. So worst comes to worst, feel free to reach out to one of us or John, and we can get you a copy of that individually. We're cognizant of how many emails come out of our house. And so we don't want to spam everybody with everything, but trying to figure out the best way to share some of those links. And then we can dump some of the tips that we've shared as well into one of those emails, or again, feel free to reach out individually and we'll share that with you. So I think with that, we can open it up to questions. Feel free to unmute yourself and ask. Go ahead, Shannon.
Yeah, I was just going to highlight something Era said, you know, on testimony in particular, when you introduce yourself. I've seen this a lot because a lot of times people are nervous and you go up and you just want to get it all out, right? But it's really important to take that moment and say who you are. I've seen folks testify that are like directly impacted by a bill and don't tell the legislators how they are. And it's, you know, it's just really important, I think, to give that context. So I would just highlight that. And then also on the repeating, they do get like, come on, people, let's go. But I would also say it's really important to say like someone else said, or make sure that they know that you also care about that concern. So it's not that you're repeating, but you're emphasizing. I think that that's really important. So they know that it's a common concern and not just one person with that concern.
And I think that covers what Mary just asked in the chat. When testifying, if you concur with another speaker, is it helpful to note that rather than repeating their point? So Shannon, you were on point, or my chat was slow, one or the other there. So yeah, I think probably the easiest way is if you can raise hand on Zoom, we can call on you, or honestly, feel free to just unmute yourself and take your video or put your video on. And feel free to ask questions. If we have too many people trying to ask at once, we'll come up with some other order. But yeah, open to questions. We've got another 10, maybe 15 minutes for questions. So if anybody has questions, feel free. This is the time for the panelists. You guys stunned them into silence. Good job. Everybody got everything.
I have a question. I'm Mary Cockett from Cody, Wyoming, stuck in Minneapolis right now with my brother. And I'm not the best follower on all of this legislative stuff with Wyoming Outdoor Council. So apologies if you've done this already. Is there a thing that says these are the bills we're watching and that you might want to be prepared to speak on, or helping us sort through the 700 bills so that perhaps we don't have to read them all? You might say these are the ones, and these are some thoughts that we have on these bills.
Yeah, thanks, Mary. We are working on that. Bills are still dropping. So we know some of the known bills are coming out, and we'll include some of those in the legislative preview email coming out next week. But we don't know all the bills and where priorities are going to be. Just because they are still dropping, they'll drop through the beginning of the session. Yeah, John, any additional insight there on how best we've shared in the past on bills externally?
Yeah, no, to your point, Mary, like we will create eventually a document that's going to have all the bills that we're tracking, bills that we support, bills that we oppose, bills that we oppose, and the bills that we're tracking. But to Brandon's bigger point here, like we're in the process of actually creating that, just because there's still so much more to be seen. But we do create that, and then that becomes a public thing that we will share in our correspondences out to the public and out to our members about following this session.
Yeah, and I would say from Powder River Basin Resource Council's perspective, so we share information with our members and only our members for the most part and during the legislative session. And that's strategic on our part because we don't want, say, like an action alert to get sent to a legislator. And so we do weekly updates on Fridays or Saturday mornings, depending on the timing and the ability of us to actually write it up. With a kind of a rundown on all the bills we're watching. And then we also do priority action alerts throughout the week. And like it was previously stated, it's really important for you to kind of pay attention to what those of us who are professional lobbyists are saying about a bill in terms of like, these are the people you should reach out to. You know, maybe there's swing votes on a committee that we want to put a particular emphasis upon. Talking points that we've tested and know were effective, we're going to put in those action alerts. And so it's, you know, it's important to kind of follow our lead, I would say. And we help you through the process. And if you ever have any questions, let us know. But it's really, you know, we're trying to guide you on, you know, these are the most important bills. These are the most important times to reach out. And these are the people that you need to get in touch with. And similar, you know, Wyoming Education Association does a lot on education bills. You know, there's groups that work on equality issues in the state, groups that work on, you know, reproductive rights and women's issues. You know, so follow those groups and really follow their lead is what I would encourage you to do on issues that you really care about. So.
Thanks, Shannon. That was great. John as well. And we do a weekly action or a weekly update and then action alerts as well through the Outdoor Council. That goes to our membership too. And so that'll be just exactly like Shannon said, kind of leading you guys on what we've got, what we're thinking and what we've got going. There was a question about who at the legislature actually drafts the language of the bills that go to committee. As far as I know, the legislator, if it's an individual bill, works with the LSO, and then the LSO actually drafts that language. When the bill has come through committee, it's probably a little more work, but a lot of that is LSO, the Legislative Service Office, who John and all these guys have talked about.
Yeah, I would say, although there's the caveat of like stuff that's late filed in session. So everything goes through the Legislative Service Office, but there's only 12 staff attorneys at the office. I mean, and all of them, and you know, we talked about legislators not having subject matter expertise. You know, the attorneys don't either for the government, and so they're drafting bills that often they don't have subject matter expertise in, and so they basically just put it in a format, and they're not really doing a lot of editing or kind of thinking about constitutionality even to some degree, and so professionally drafted, I think is, yeah, not entirely accurate for what you're going to see in the legislative process, unfortunately. For committee amendments, and that was one thing I was going to say too, if you do have an amendment for a bill that you want to present in your testimony, that should definitely be in writing and distributed to the legislators in advance of the committee, unless you have a particular sponsor for that amendment that, you know, has that amendment already drafted. But there's a particular drafting format and things like that I'm happy to help you with. Era or John could as well, like if you want to actually present an amendment to the committee. But it's yeah, there's, you know, particular ways that you draft legislation or amendments, but it's sometimes not very well vetted in terms of the actual language.
Yeah, thanks for that context, Shannon. That was great. And LSO, the Legislative Service Office, has just been worked a lot in the last few years with COVID and the number of bills and just the state of affairs with the finances of the state. So they try hard, but like Shannon said, when things come in last minute, they can come out the door. A couple questions on any tips if one lives in a district where the senator representative is actively against our viewpoint. Similar question, if sometimes feel if I contact my senator, he will do the opposite of what I ask. I'd throw that to the panelists if there's any insight there.
I agree that can feel challenging, and that's where looking for those common values can be really important. And a lot of legislators are new. Many of us haven't had time to develop relationships with some of the new folks, but creating that relationship, whether it's via email or better yet, inviting someone out to a beverage of their choosing or things like that, just to get to know someone, to find that place of commonality that you can start from. And once you find that common ground, helping them understand like how you are impacted or how it impacts the values that you hold dear. But I agree that if you just start from a place of opposition, that can be challenging, though it is still important for folks to know that not everyone that they represent agrees with whatever position they're going forward. So fight the good fight.
Yeah, and knowing both Maria and Chris, I mean, you both do great jobs, I think, on trying to develop those relationships. And, you know, it could be that your kids go to the same school, or, you know, you have a church connection, or, you know, some other different connection that you're able to sort of relate as humans to your legislator, which is really important to be able to do, particularly in these polarizing times that we find ourselves in. But yeah, I would just echo Era that, you know, it's important to hear that they hear from you, even if you know that it's going to be in opposition and a hostile audience. So, and then, yeah, whether citizens have access to LSO staff, the Legislative Service Office staff, I mean, technically, no. So the director of the Legislative Service Office, I've had this conversation with a few of you. It's kind of interesting, like Matt Obrick and I had a conversation years ago when he was attorney for the Minerals Committee on who is his client as like an attorney for the Legislative Service Office. He's like, is it the chairman of the committee? At that time, it was Eli Beebout. Or, you know, the state in general, is it the citizens? Like, who is, you know, they're an attorney, so they have clients, and who is their client? But, you know, he always viewed his client as the people. And with that kind of a broader mandate on his attorney-client relationship with all of us. But you can, I think, you know, reach out to them. I often do in the interim process if I want to know like where a bill is or what's going to be on a committee agenda or kind of what things are going on. It's just, you know, similar to anybody else, you build a relationship with them and then they start trusting you. Sometimes you'll get into an email conversation with the attorney and like the legislator, particularly if you're involved in the drafting process, but most of you probably wouldn't be involved at that level. But their, you know, their office is open to the public down at the Capitol, so you can always walk in and ask questions. There's fiscal staff, attorney staff, and then again, the director, all the technical staff, they run the Zoom. I mean, it's a very small staff that does everything. So they're very busy during the legislative session.
Thanks, Shannon. And you'll often see them off to the side in the committee meetings, and, you know, don't try not to interrupt them if they're in the middle of a meeting, but you can try and catch them sometimes on the side in a break or something like that as well. So I don't see any more questions in the chat. Is anybody have any questions in person or on Zoom? Just want to speak up and ask any. If not, we're at 1:02 and I know folks got to get back to life. So last chance. Yeah. I really want to thank all of you for attending today. I know time's valuable, especially this time of year. And I would really like to thank our panelists, especially Shannon, for joining us. I'd like to acknowledge Keith Riddle. He's our other contract lobbyist that's going to be down at Cheyenne for the beginning of the session, the first month of the session. And then I dumped in the chat our emails. They're easy to find on our websites as well. Feel free to reach out. I will note that Era doesn't start until February. She'll be traveling and working. So if you email her in January, she might not get back a hold of you right away. So starting in February, Era's email will be live. Just looking through the chat to make sure we didn't miss anything. Lots of thank yous from the group. Yeah, and with that, don't hesitate to reach out to us. It's awesome that you guys all attended, and it's important for folks to hear your voices. Like they said, about half the house is new. there's going to be a lot of education. It's going to be important that conservation is a priority, and they hear that from all of you guys. So yeah, just a huge thank you to attendees and the panelists today, and everybody stay warm and safe out there. All right, we'll appreciate it and have a good Thursday.